Death was supposed to be final. Marcus Chun had accepted that truth as alien claws tore through his chest while he shielded 3 dragon hatchlings from their would-be killers. He'd closed his eyes expecting darkness, peace, maybe nothing at all. Instead, he woke up in a medical bay 3 months later with scars that glowed like starfire and a galaxy that had descended into chaos because someone had dared to harm the children he died protecting. The dragons, it turned out, weren't just any dragons. They were the last heirs of the Drachmarie Imperium, the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilization. And Marcus Chun, a simple human cargo hauler who'd stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time, had just become the most wanted and most protected person in known space. Some called him a hero. Others branded him a terrorist. The dragons called him something else entirely: family. And now, with ancient technologies flowing through his resurrected body and 3 baby dragons who considered him their father, Marcus was about to learn that sometimes the greatest wars begin not with grand declarations or political schemes, but with one person's refusal to let innocent children die alone. Marcus Chen's cargo hauler, the Wandering Star, drifted through the asteroid field like a dying whale. The ship's engines had given up 3 hours ago, leaving him stranded in the middle of nowhere with a hold full of medical supplies that were supposed to reach the colony on Kepler 442b 2 days ago. The emergency beacon wasn't working either, naturally. Everything that could go wrong had gone wrong, which seemed to be the story of his life lately. He was working on the engine's primary coupling when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the cold silence of space. It was faint, coming through the hull, but unmistakably organic. A cry, high-pitched and desperate like a child calling for help. Marcus grabbed his emergency suit and cycled through the airlock. Outside, his headlamp swept across the pockmarked surface of a nearby asteroid. The beam caught something that made his breath catch in his throat. Gouges in the rock, too regular to be natural. Claw marks, big ones. Following the marks led him to a cave entrance that had been sealed with some kind of metallic barrier. The crying was coming from inside, accompanied by scratching sounds. Something was trapped in there, and from the desperation in those cries, it wasn't going to last much longer. The barrier looked like it was made from some advanced alloy he didn't recognize. His cutting torch made short work of it, though it took 20 minutes and most of his fuel. When the barrier finally gave way, the smell hit him first. Ozone and sulfur and something else, something alive and wild. 3 shapes huddled in the back of the cave, each about the size of a large dog. They had scales that shifted color in his lamplight, from deep blue to silver to gold. Wings folded against their backs, long serpentine necks, and eyes that held an intelligence that made Marcus's skin crawl. Not because they were threatening, but because they looked so utterly, heartbreakingly young. Dragon hatchlings. He'd heard stories about the Drachmarie, the ancient race that ruled the far edge of the galaxy. Nobody had seen one in human space for over a century, but everyone knew the legends. Beings of immense power and intelligence who treated other species like insects. What were their children doing here, trapped and apparently abandoned? The largest of the 3 raised its head and made a sound that was part chirp, part growl. It was trying to communicate, he realized. The other 2 pressed closer to their sibling, all 3 staring at Marcus with eyes that reflected his lamp like mirrors. "Hey there," he said softly, the way he might talk to a frightened animal. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The largest hatchling took a tentative step forward, then another. When it reached him, it pressed its snout against his gloved hand and made a sound that could only be described as a purr. The other 2 followed, and suddenly Marcus found himself surrounded by 3 baby dragons who seemed to have decided he was safe. That's when he heard the ships approaching. The sound of engines echoed through the cave, multiple vessels by the sound of it. Marcus killed his lamp and moved to the cave entrance, the hatchlings following close behind. Through the thin atmosphere, he could see running lights descending toward the asteroid. 3 ships, sleek and predatory-looking, with hull markings he didn't recognize. His comm unit crackled to life. "Attention, human vessel. We know you're here. We've detected the opening of the containment barrier. Return our property, and we might let you live." Property. They were calling these children property. Marcus looked back at the three hatchlings, who had pressed themselves against the cave wall. They understood what was happening, he realized. They knew these people, and they were terrified. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied into his comm, a burst of static, then a different voice. Colder. "Don't play games with us. Those are stolen Drachmary offspring. They're worth more than your entire pathetic species combined. Hand them over. And if I don't, then we take them anyway, and use your corpse as a warning to others who might interfere with consortium business." The consortium? Marcus had heard whispers about them in the shadier ports. Slavers, pirates, weapons dealers, anything illegal and profitable, they had their fingers in it. If they had somehow gotten their hands on dragon hatchlings, it could only mean very bad things. The ships landed on the asteroid's surface with precision that spoke of military training. Marcus watched through his scope as armored figures emerged from the vessels. They moved like soldiers, weapons ready, heading straight for the cave. He had maybe 5 minutes before they reached him. His own sidearm felt pathetically inadequate against whatever weapons they were carrying, but it was all he had. That and a choice. He could surrender the hatchlings and probably live. They were dragon children. After all, they could take care of themselves, right? Their own people would come looking for them eventually. It wasn't his problem, except they were looking at him with those intelligent, trusting eyes. And they were just babies, regardless of what they might grow up to become. Marcus checked his weapon's charge and positioned himself at the cave entrance. "Listen, little ones," he said without turning around. "I don't know what kind of mess you've gotten yourselves into, but nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. Not while I'm breathing." The largest hatchling made that purring sound again and moved to stand beside him, its scales shifting to match the colors of the rock around them. Natural camouflage. The other two followed suit, and suddenly the cave was filled with the sound of young voices trying to roar. It would have been adorable if the situation weren't so dire. The first consortium soldier appeared at the cave mouth, weapon raised. Marcus put him down with 2 shots to the chest. The armor held, but the impact sent the man tumbling back down the slope. "He's armed," someone shouted. "Multiple hostiles in the cave. Multiple hostiles." Marcus almost smiled. If they only knew. What followed was the longest 30 minutes of Marcus's life. The consortium soldiers were professionals, but they were fighting in an enclosed space against an enemy who knew the terrain. Marcus used every trick he'd learned in his brief military service, moving through the cave's various chambers and passages, always keeping the hatchlings behind him. The dragons helped in ways he couldn't have expected. Their natural camouflage made them nearly invisible against the rock, and they seemed to understand tactics instinctively. When soldiers tried to flank Marcus, the hatchlings would appear from nowhere, tripping them or creating distractions that gave Marcus the opening he needed. But there were too many soldiers and not enough ammunition. Eventually, they cornered him in the deepest part of the cave. The hatchlings pressed close against his legs as armed figures emerged from the shadows, weapons trained on them all. "Enough," said the leader, removing his helmet to reveal a scarred face and cold eyes. "You've cost us time and equipment, human, but the contract still stands. Hand over the merchandise." "They're not merchandise," Marcus said, keeping his weapon aimed at the man's head. "They're children. They're Drachmary spawn. Do you have any idea what someone would pay for living specimens? For the secrets locked in their genetics?" The man smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. The dragons might be lords of their little corner of space, but out here, they're just another exotic commodity. "Over my dead body. That can be arranged." The soldiers opened fire. Marcus threw himself over the hatchlings, feeling the energy bolts tear through his body. Pain exploded through his chest, his back, his limbs. Blood filled his mouth as he collapsed, still trying to shield the 3 small forms beneath him. Through the haze of dying, he heard one of the soldiers curse. "The little monsters are bonding with him. Look at their scales." Marcus managed to turn his head. The hatchling scales were glowing now, pulsing with a light that seemed to come from within. They were touching him, their small claws resting on his arms and chest, and where they touched, his blood seemed to shimmer with the same strange radiance. "Sir, the scanners are going crazy. Energy readings are off the charts. Doesn't matter. Grab them and let's go. The bonding won't survive without a living host." But even as darkness closed around Marcus's vision, he could hear something in the distance. A sound like thunder, like the roar of ancient gods awakening from long sleep. The asteroid shook, dust falling from the cave ceiling. "Sir, ships decloaking around the asteroid. Dozens of them. What ships? There's nothing on sensors. Drachmary ships, sir. They're Drachmary ships." The last thing Marcus heard before consciousness faded was the sound of weapons firing and men screaming. Then there was only the warm weight of the hatchlings against his chest and the strange, comforting pulse of their glowing scales. He died thinking he'd at least bought them a few more minutes. He was wrong about a lot of things. When Marcus next opened his eyes, he was lying in what could only be described as a medical bay designed by someone with very different ideas about anatomy than humans. The ceiling curved overhead like the inside of an egg, covered in patterns that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Tubes and wires connected to his arms and chest, but instead of the sterile plastic and metal he was used to, everything seemed to be made of some organic material that pulsed with its own inner light. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His body felt wrong, different, stronger, but in a way that made his skin crawl. When he looked down at his chest, he could see scars where the energy weapons had torn through him, but the scars themselves seemed to be glowing with a faint blue radiance. "You're awake." The voice came from behind him, speaking accented standard. Marcus turned to see a figure that made his breath catch in his throat. 7 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to silver as it moved, with eyes like molten gold, and a face that was unmistakably reptilian, but somehow still managed to convey intelligence and, surprisingly, kindness. A Drachmary, an actual, living Drachmary. "The hatchlings," Marcus croaked. His voice sounded different too, rougher. "Are they safe?" the dragon said, moving closer. "Thanks to you. I am Vaelthera, clutch mother of the younglings you protected. And you, Marcus Chun of Earth, are a puzzle that has confounded our greatest minds. I don't understand. You died protecting our children. By all rights, your body should have been buried in space weeks ago. But the hatchlings bonded with you in your final moments, sharing their life essence to preserve yours. It has never been done before, not with an alien species. The biological incompatibilities alone should have killed you both." Marcus looked at the glowing scars on his arms. "But it worked. More than worked. The bond has changed you in ways we're only beginning to understand. Your lifespan has been extended to match ours, several thousand years. Your physical capabilities have been enhanced. Most importantly, you now carry within you a genetic marker that identifies you as family to any Drachmary you encounter." Family. Vaelthera's expression was difficult to read, but there seemed to be amusement there. "The hatchlings have declared you their clutch father. In our culture, such declarations are sacred and binding. Congratulations, Marcus Chun. You are now the only human in the galaxy with full rights and protections under Drachmary law." The implications of that statement were staggering, but before Marcus could fully process them, the medical bay's entrance opened and 3 familiar shapes bounded into the room. The hatchlings had grown in the weeks since he'd last seen them, now the size of large wolves, but their scales still shifted colors with their emotions, and their eyes still held that same intelligent gleam. They surrounded his medical bed, chirping and purring and nuzzling against his hands. When the largest one, he'd started thinking of it as Storm based on the gray-blue color its scales favored, pressed its forehead against his, Marcus felt something he could only describe as a mental touch. Not telepathy exactly, but an emotional connection that let him feel their joy at seeing him alive. "They've been waiting for you to wake up," Vaelthera said. "They refuse to leave this chamber, even when we told them it might be days or weeks. They knew you would return to them. What happened to the consortium soldiers? Valethra's expression hardened. Eliminated. Every ship, every operative who participated in the abduction of our young. The consortium ceased to exist as an organization approximately 72 hours after we found you. 72 hours? How long was I unconscious? 3 months, 17 days. Your body required extensive reconstruction. The bonding process preserved your neural patterns and essential organs, but everything else had to be regrown using a combination of your genetic template and Drachmary biotechnology. 3 months. Marcus tried to process that. 3 months of lost time while his body was being rebuilt by alien technology. What about my ship? My cargo? Your vessel has been repaired and upgraded with Drachmary technology. Your cargo was delivered to its intended destination, along with considerable compensation for the delay. We do not forget debts, especially those owed to family. Family. The word kept coming back to that. Marcus looked at the 3 hatchlings pressed against his bed and felt that strange emotional connection pulse through his mind. They really did consider him their father in whatever way dragons understood family. And apparently, their entire civilization was willing to honor that bond. There's something else, Valethra continued. Something you need to understand about what has happened while you healed. The attack on our young was not random. It was coordinated, planned by a coalition of species who believe the Drachmary have grown too powerful and need to be brought down. A coalition. The hegemony of free worlds, the corporate alliance, the Stellar Republic. They formed an unprecedented alliance with one goal: the complete destruction of the Drachmary Imperium. They see us as a threat to their expansion and influence. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the medical bay's temperature. That sounds like the setup for a war. Not the setup for a war, Valethra corrected. The war has already begun. The attack on our children was their opening move. They sought to capture them alive, to study them, to learn our weaknesses and biological secrets. Instead, they found you. I'm just a cargo hauler. I don't see how I factor into galactic politics. Valethra's laugh was like the sound of wind chimes made of metal. You're no longer just anything, Marcus Chun. You're the first alien to be granted full familial status in our society. You carry Drachmary life essence in your body. You have 3 of our young who will follow you to the ends of the galaxy. And, most importantly, you've proven that other species are capable of the kind of self-sacrifice and honor that we value above all else. The largest hatchling, Storm, chirped and nuzzled against Marcus's hand. Through their connection, he could feel the young dragon's emotions: love, loyalty, gratitude, and, underneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that reminded him of his own feelings during the fight in the cave. They're not just considering me family, he said slowly. They're planning to fight beside me. They're Drachmary, Valethra said simply. Fighting beside family is what we do. The question is, what do you plan to fight for? Marcus looked around the alien medical bay, at the dragon who had saved his life, at the 3 young creatures who had bonded with him so completely that they'd shared their very life force to keep him alive. A month ago, he'd been nobody special, just another human trying to make a living in a galaxy that barely noticed his existence. Now he was at the center of what sounded like a brewing galactic war, bonded to dragons who considered him family, and enhanced with alien technology that had literally brought him back from the dead. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was also the most important thing he'd ever been asked to do. Marcus's first real taste of the war came 6 weeks after he'd awakened in the Drachmary Medical Bay. The hegemony had launched a surprise attack on a mining colony in the Outer Rim, a place called Haven's Rest that housed nearly 50,000 civilians. The attack wasn't strategic in any military sense. The colony had no defenses and produced nothing of value except basic minerals. It was a message, pure and simple: nowhere was safe. He learned about it while standing in what the Drachmary called a war chamber, a vast spherical room aboard their command ship Starfire's Edge, where holographic displays showed real-time intelligence from across the galaxy. The images of Haven's Rest burning were impossible to look away from. Orbital bombardment had turned most of the settlement into glass and ash. The few survivors spoke of soldiers who executed anyone who tried to surrender. 23,000 dead, reported the loss, a massive Drachmary warrior whose scales bore the scars of countless battles. Men, women, children. The attackers made no distinction. Storm, Echo, and Whisper, the names the three hatchlings had chosen for themselves as they learned to communicate in Standard, pressed close to Marcus as he watched the reports. They were nearly full-grown now, each the size of a small shuttle, their scales having settled into distinct color patterns that reflected their personalities. Storms were the deep blue-gray of thunderclouds, Echoes shifted between silver and gold, and Whispers were pure black with veins of starlight that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Through their bond, Marcus could feel their rage. It burned in his own chest like a cold fire, different from human anger. This was something ancient and implacable, the fury of a predator that had been insulted beyond tolerance. Why Haven's Rest? Marcus asked. There are bigger targets, more important ones. Veilthera manipulated the holographic display, highlighting trade routes and communication nodes around the destroyed colony. It was chosen precisely because it was unimportant. The message is clear. If the Drachmary cannot protect this insignificant human colony, how can they protect anyone? They're trying to erode confidence in our protection. And working, added another dragon Marcus had come to know as Karath. 3 systems have already withdrawn from their mutual defense pacts with us. 7 more are reconsidering their positions. Marcus studied the tactical displays. Since his bonding with the hatchlings, he'd found that his mind worked differently. Faster, able to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. It was one of many changes the dragon life essence had made to his biology. They're not just trying to break your alliances. They're trying to force you into a specific type of response. Explain. If the Drachmary respond with their usual overwhelming force, they look like the aggressors. Brutal aliens crushing freedom-loving species. If they don't respond strongly enough, they look weak and unreliable. It's a no-win scenario unless... Marcus gestured to the display showing the attack formation. Unless someone else responds first. Someone the galaxy doesn't expect to see leading a military operation. The war chamber fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Marcus could feel dozens of ancient, intelligent minds considering his words. You're suggesting you lead a response, the Lost said finally. A human commanding Drachmary forces. Not commanding, participating. As an equal member of a Drachmary clutch. Marcus looked at Storm, who rumbled what might have been approval. The galaxy knows about the bonding by now, right? News like that doesn't stay secret. Veilthera nodded. Every major news service has run stories about the human who died for dragon children. Most assumed it was propaganda until independent verification confirmed the biological impossibility of what had occurred. Then, they know I'm not some puppet or hired mercenary. I'm family. When family responds to an attack on innocence, it's not aggression, it's justice. What followed was the strangest planning session of Marcus's life. The Drachmary approached warfare like a combination of chess match and religious ritual. Every move was considered not just for its tactical value, but for what it communicated about their civilization's values and intentions. The target they settled on was a hegemony-supplied depot called Fortress Meridian, hidden in an asteroid field in the Kappa Centauri system. Intelligence suggested it was where the fleet that had destroyed Haven's Rest was resupplying and planning their next attack. 67 ships, Whisper observed, her mental voice a soft whisper in Marcus's mind that matched her name. Heavy cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels. Well-defended, multiple sensor nets, and automated defense platforms. A target worthy of a clutch's attention, Echo added, her mental voice carrying hints of silver laughter. But not impossible for 4 dragons working together. For dragons. Marcus still wasn't used to thinking of himself that way. But The bond had changed him in ways that went beyond the physical. He could feel space around him the way his bondmates did, could sense the gravitational flows and energy patterns that made interstellar travel possible. When Storm spread her wings and prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Marcus felt the same anticipation singing in his modified nervous system. The journey to Kappa Centauri took 3 days aboard a modified Drachmary infiltration vessel. The ship was alive in a way that human technology never achieved, its hull grown rather than built, its systems responding to thought as much as touch. Marcus had learned to interface with it through his bond with the Hatchlings, becoming part of the ship's extended nervous system during the flight. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and immediately went silent, drifting on minimal power while passive sensors mapped the enemy positions. The hegemony had been busy. The asteroid field now bristled with weapons platforms, sensor arrays, and patrol ships. Getting close enough to attack would require threading through a maze of overlapping detection grids. Standard approach would be to use overwhelming force, Storm used through their bond. Jump in with a full battle group and destroy everything before they can respond. But that plays into their narrative, Marcus replied. Brutal dragons attacking defenseless supply bases. We need something more surgical. Agreed, Echo added. Something that shows precision and restraint while still delivering an unmistakable message. The plan they developed was complex and required split-second timing. The ship would approach the depot using a combination of stealth technology and natural camouflage, appearing to be just another asteroid drifting through the field. Once they were close enough, Marcus and his bondmates would separate from the ship and approach the depot directly. Dragons, it turned out, could survive in space without any technological assistance. Their scales could seal against vacuum. Their bodies could process stored oxygen for hours, and they could maneuver using controlled bursts of plasma from specialized glands. Marcus, enhanced by the bonding, found he could do the same, though it felt deeply unnatural to his still partially human mind. The four of them drifted through space like hunters, staying in the shadow of asteroids and debris. Through his enhanced senses, Marcus could feel the electromagnetic chatter of the hegemony base, the heat signatures of their ships, the gravitational disturbance of their artificial gravity generators. Remember, he whispered through the bond as they approached the outer perimeter, we're not here to kill everyone. We're here to send a message. The first security patrol never saw them coming. For shapes materialized out of the void, moving with deadly precision. Storm's claws shorted out the patrol ship's main power systems. Echo's plasma breath disabled its communications array. Whisper wrapped herself around the vessel's hull and began systematically destroying its weapon systems. Marcus, moving within human speed and strength, cut through the ship's armor plating and disabled its engines. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, the patrol ship was completely helpless, but its crew was unharmed, floating in their sealed bridge section with full life support and emergency beacons. What the hell are you? The patrol leader's voice crackled through the comm system as Marcus prepared to leave. Family, Marcus replied simply. They repeated the process with 3 more patrol ships before reaching the depot itself. The massive structure was built into a hollowed-out asteroid, bristling with defensive weapons and sensor arrays. Normal doctrine would have called for systematically destroying each defense system before attempting to infiltrate the base. Instead, Marcus and his bondmates went straight to the heart of the facility. The depot's main hangar bay was protected by energy shields and automated defense turrets. Storm generated an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled the shields. Echo melted through the hangar doors with precisely controlled plasma bursts. Whisper's natural camouflage allowed her to slip past the confused automated defenses. Marcus rode on Storm's back as they swept into the hangar, moving too fast for the human defenders to track. What followed was the most one-sided battle Marcus had ever witnessed. The hegemony soldiers were well-trained and well-equipped, but they were fighting an enemy that operated on completely different principles. The dragons moved like living weapons, their enhanced reflexes and natural armor making them nearly invulnerable to small arms fire. Marcus, enhanced by the bond and armed with Drachmarie plasma weapons, was able to move and fight in ways that defied human understanding. But it wasn't the fighting that mattered. It was what happened when they reached the depot's command center. Commander Sarah Kellner, the hegemony officer in charge of Fortress Meridian, was a career military woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. When Marcus and his bondmates broke into her command center, she was standing at attention behind her desk, her sidearm drawn, but not aimed. "Marcus Chun," she said, her voice steady despite the three enormous dragons flanking him. "The famous human who thinks he's a dragon. The human who is part of a dragon clutch," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm standing, you look like just another alien weapon pointed at human civilization." Marcus studied her for a moment, feeling the rage of his bondmates through their connection. They wanted to end this quickly, to make an example that would be remembered across the galaxy. But something in the commander's bearing gave him pause. "You were at Haven's Rest?" he said. It wasn't a question. Through the depot's computer systems, Whisper had already accessed the fleet records. "I was," Kellner replied without flinching. "Following orders. Orders to massacre civilians? Orders to demonstrate the consequences of alliance with hostile alien forces." Her voice was still steady, but Marcus could see the doubt in her eyes. "The Drachmarie are a threat to human independence. They need to be contained. By murdering children?" For the first time, Kellner's composure cracked. That wasn't supposed to happen. The operation was supposed to be a surgical strike against infrastructure targets. When the civilians wouldn't evacuate, you killed them anyway. My commander gave the order. I followed it. She straightened again, but the steel in her voice had been replaced by something that might have been regret. "That's what soldiers do." Marcus felt Storm's fury spike through their bond, a killing rage that demanded immediate action. Echo and Whisper were equally inclined toward violence. Through their enhanced senses, they could detect the lies and half-truths in Kellner's words, the way she justified atrocity through the lens of military discipline. But Marcus also sensed something else. Genuine conflict. A career soldier who had crossed a line she hadn't meant to cross, and was struggling to live with the consequences. "Commander," he said slowly, "how many more Haven's Rests are planned?" Kellner's eyes widened slightly. "I can't. I'm not asking you to betray military secrets. I'm asking you to save lives. Human lives, since that's what you claim to care about." Through the bond, Marcus could feel his bondmates' confusion. They understood the concept of mercy, but applying it to enemies who had murdered innocents was difficult for them to accept. "If I tell you," Kellner said finally, "what guarantee do I have that you won't simply attack them first?" "You don't," Marcus admitted. "But you do have my word that if you help us prevent civilian casualties, I'll make sure you and your people are treated as prisoners of war rather than war criminals. And if I don't," Marcus gestured to Storm, whose scales were beginning to glow with barely contained plasma energy. "Then we leave here having delivered our message in a way that nobody will ever forget. Your choice." The next several hours were a delicate negotiation that probably violated every rule of warfare Marcus had ever heard of. Commander Kellner provided intelligence on planned hegemony operations targeting civilian populations. In return, Marcus and his bondmates disabled rather than destroyed the depot's defensive systems and allowed the evacuation of non-essential personnel. By the time reinforcements arrived, Fortress Meridian was a derelict shell floating in space. Every ship had been disabled, but not destroyed. Every weapon system had been surgically removed. The depot's computer cores had been wiped clean, and its supply stores had been appropriated for distribution to refugee populations. But the depot's personnel were alive, floating in life pods with full emergency supplies, and working communication systems. The message was impossible to misinterpret. The dragons could have killed everyone. They chose not to. This time, the response to the Fortress Meridian operation was immediate and intense. News networks across the galaxy ran footage of the disabled hegemony ships and the testimony of surviving personnel. The image of Marcus Chun, the human who fought alongside dragons with precision rather than rage, dominated the headlines. Surgical strike leaves hegemony forces intact but helpless. Human dragon clutch demonstrates restraint in retaliation. Is this the new face of Drakmari warfare? But the most important response came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the operation, as Marcus and his bondmates were returning to Drakmari space, they received a priority transmission on a frequency that shouldn't have existed. "This is Commander Kellner," the voice said through encrypted channels. "I have information about Operation Purge Flame. 47 civilian targets across 12 systems. Attack begins in 6 days." Storm's mental voice was puzzled. Why would she help us? Marcus thought about the doubt he'd seen in Kellner's eyes, the way her voice had changed when she talked about the massacre at Haven's Rest. Because sometimes seeing yourself clearly is the first step toward becoming who you're supposed to be. Through their bond, he felt his bondmates' gradual understanding. The war they were fighting wasn't just about military victory or territorial control. It was about proving that different species could coexist without sacrificing their essential nature. That strength didn't have to mean cruelty, and that protecting family could include protecting strangers who had no one else to turn to. The galaxy was watching, and slowly, carefully, Marcus and his bondmates were showing them what family really meant. But wars are not won with single battles, no matter how perfectly executed. As they prepared to intercept Operation Purge Flame, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were still only seeing the edges of a much larger conflict. The hegemony, the corporate alliance, and the Stellar Republic hadn't formed their unprecedented coalition just to attack random dragon settlements. They were building towards something bigger, something that would require more than surgical strikes and moral demonstrations to stop. Through the bond, his 3 companions shared his unease. They had bought time with their victory at Fortress Meridian, had perhaps saved thousands of lives with Kellner's intelligence. But the real war, the one that would determine the shape of galactic civilization for centuries to come, was still ahead of them. Marcus Chun, cargo hauler turned dragon-bonded warrior, settled in for the long flight to their next target and tried not to think about how many more impossible choices lay ahead. The war reached its turning point in the most unlikely place imaginable, a forgotten research station orbiting a dying star in the Veil Nebula. The station had been abandoned for decades, its original purpose lost to bureaucratic shuffling and budget cuts. But, according to Commander Kellner's intelligence network, she had become an unofficial liaison between the resistance movement and Marcus's growing coalition. It now housed something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Project Genesis, Kellner explained during their secure transmission from wherever she was hiding. It's been in development for 15 years, completely off the books. A biological weapon designed specifically to target Drakmari physiology. Marcus felt sick. Through the bond, he could sense Storm, Echo, and Whisper's horror and rage mixing with his own emotions. They were aboard their modified ship Bondbreaker, named in grim humor for its ability to slip past any detection system the Coalition forces had developed. 6 months of hit-and-run operations had turned them into the most wanted individuals in 3 different galactic governments. How close are they to completion? Marcus asked. Unknown, but the facility just received a massive shipment of biological materials and genetic sequencing equipment. The scientists are working around the clock. Whatever they're doing, they're in the final stages. Through the view screen, Marcus could see the research station hanging in space like a metal parasite against the dying star's orange glow. It didn't look like much, just another corporate research facility, indistinguishable from thousands of others scattered across the galaxy. But appearances were deceiving. Scan results are coming in, Whisper reported, her mental voice carrying undertones of unease. The station's power output is massive for its size. Whatever they're running in there requires enormous energy. Life signs? Marcus asked. Approximately 300 sentients aboard, Echo replied. Mostly human, some vegan, a few centaurians. No drachmary, which is suspicious given the nature of their research. Storm's scales rippled with contained fury. They're experimenting on our people's genetic material without any of our people present to observe or consent. The implications were staggering. If the Coalition had developed a weapon that could target drachmary specifically, they could wipe out the entire species without harming other galactic populations. It would be genocide on a scale that made the previous attacks look like minor skirmishes. But it also presented Marcus with the most difficult choice of his new existence. Every instinct, every emotion flowing through the bond with his companions, demanded immediate action. Strike fast, strike hard, destroy the facility before the weapon could be completed. Except there were 300 innocent people aboard that station. Scientists and technicians who might not even know what they were really working on. Support staff who were just trying to make a living in a galaxy gone mad with war. The direct approach won't work, Marcus said finally. We can't just blow up the station. Too many innocents. Then we infiltrate, Storm suggested. Destroy the research. Leave the people. Not enough time. Even if we could get aboard undetected, finding and destroying all traces of the research would take hours we don't have. And once we're discovered, through the bond, his companions could feel his conflict. The tactical situation was impossible. Any action strong enough to guarantee the weapon's destruction would likely result in massive civilian casualties. But inaction would mean allowing the completion of a genocide weapon. There is another option, Echo said quietly. One that none of us want to consider. Marcus knew what she meant before she spoke the words. Surrender. Not surrender, Whisper corrected. Negotiation. From a position of strength. The plan they developed over the next several hours was the most dangerous thing Marcus had ever attempted. It required perfect timing, absolute trust between the four bondmates, and a level of political sophistication that none of them were entirely comfortable with. The first step was making contact. Marcus had Bondbreaker drop out of stealth at the edge of the system and broadcast on all emergency frequencies. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Patrol ships, defense platforms, even a heavy cruiser that had been lurking behind one of the system's outer planets. This is Admiral Patricia Voss of the Free World's hegemony, came the response. Marcus Chun, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Your ship will be boarded, and you will be taken into custody for crimes against galactic peace. Admiral Voss. Marcus recognized the name from intelligence reports. She was the architect of the Haven's Rest Massacre, the military genius behind the Coalition's most successful operations. She was also, according to Kellner's sources, the driving force behind Project Genesis. Admiral, Marcus replied, I'm here to offer you an exchange. You're in no position to negotiate, Chun. You're outnumbered 50-1 and completely surrounded. Am I? Marcus gestured to Storm, who was already beginning the sequence they had practiced dozens of times. Because I think you might want to check your long-range sensors. The pause that followed was exactly as long as Marcus had predicted. Through the quantum entanglement communicators that drachmary technology made possible, he had been in contact with the main battle fleet for the past 3 hours. They had been moving into position while he and his bondmates approached the research station. 74 drachmary capital ships, Admiral Voss said finally, her voice carefully controlled. Interesting timing. Not just timing, Marcus corrected. Coordination. Those ships are under the direct command of the Drachmary High Council. If anything happens to me or my bondmates, they have orders to sterilize this entire system. It was a bluff, but a believable one. The Drachmary had been moving toward more aggressive tactics as the war progressed, and the threat of a genocide weapon would certainly justify extreme measures. What do you want? Voss asked. Safe passage to the research station. 1 hour aboard the facility, unescorted and unmonitored. In exchange, the Drachmarie fleet withdraws, and I surrender myself to your custody. And why would you do that? Marcus took a deep breath. Because this war has to end, Admiral. And sometimes ending a war requires someone to make an impossible choice. The hour that followed was the longest of Marcus's enhanced life. Admiral Voss agreed to his terms, but made it clear that any deviation from the agreed parameters would result in the immediate destruction of his ship. The Coalition forces pulled back to a minimum safe distance while Marcus and his bondmates approached the research station. The station's docking bay was a sterile, utilitarian space that hummed with barely contained energy. As soon as their ship was secured, Marcus and his companions found themselves surrounded by security personnel and scientists, all staring at them with mixtures of fear, curiosity, and academic fascination. "Mr. Chun," said a woman in a lab coat who stepped forward from the crowd. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of this facility. I understand you've requested a tour of our research." Dr. Vasquez was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that came from years of dedication to complex scientific problems. But there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Commander Kellner, a doubt that hadn't been there when the project started. "I want to see Project Genesis," Marcus said simply. "I'm afraid that's classified." "Dr. Vasquez," Marcus interrupted gently. "I'm bonded to 3 dragons who can sense electromagnetic patterns, genetic markers, and biological processes from 50 meters away. They already know what you're working on. The question is whether you're going to show me willingly or whether I have to find it myself." The tour that followed was both fascinating and horrifying. Project Genesis wasn't just a biological weapon. It was a masterpiece of genetic engineering that had taken the best scientific minds in 3 different civilizations to develop. The weapon was designed to target specific genetic markers unique to Drachmarie physiology, causing a cascade failure in their enhanced immune systems that would be completely undetectable until it was too late. "The beauty of it, Dr. Vasquez explained as they walked through the main laboratory, is that it's completely species-specific. It won't affect any other form of life. No collateral damage, no environmental contamination. A clean, surgical solution to the Drachmarie threat." "Solution?" Marcus asked. "You're talking about genocide." "I'm talking about survival," Vasquez replied, her voice taking on an edge. "Do you know what the casualty projections look like if this war continues? Trillions dead across dozens of worlds. The Drachmarie might be honorable in their way, but they're still apex predators who see other species as inherently inferior." Through the bond, Marcus could feel his companions' reactions to the laboratory around them. Test tubes filled with synthesized Drachmarie genetic material. Computer models showing the weapon's projected spread patterns. Delivery systems designed to contaminate entire atmospheres with microscopic doses that would be impossible to detect until the killing started. But he could also sense something else. Doubt. Uncertainty. Several of the scientists working on the project were having the same moral qualms that Dr. Vasquez was trying to suppress. "How long until deployment?" Marcus asked. 48 hours, Vasquez admitted. "The final batch is being synthesized now. Once it's complete, we'll have enough to target the 17 most populous Drachmarie worlds simultaneously. 17 worlds. Billions of lives. The scale of the intended atrocity was almost incomprehensible. "Dr. Vasquez," Marcus said carefully, "before you complete this project, I think there's something you need to see." What he showed her was something that had never been demonstrated to a non-Drachmarie before. With Storm's help, he opened his mind completely to the bond network, allowing the scientist to observe the quantum-level connection that existed between him and his companions. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Through sensors that could detect the subtlest electromagnetic fluctuations, Dr. Vasquez watched as Marcus's neural patterns synchronized with those of 3 ancient, intelligent beings. She saw the exchange of memories, emotions, and thoughts that flow between them like a living river of consciousness. Most importantly, she saw the love. The absolute, unqualified devotion that bound the four of them together as family. "This is impossible," she whispered, staring at the readouts. "The biological incompatibilities alone, but the emotional resonance patterns, the shared consciousness matrix, you're not just bonded to them. You're part of them. And they're part of me," Marcus confirmed. "Everything I am, they share. Everything they are, I carry within me. When you create a weapon designed to kill Drachmarie, Dr. Vasquez, you're creating a weapon designed to kill me." The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus Chun, the human who had become a symbol of cooperation between species, the man whose story had been broadcast across the galaxy as proof that different forms of life could coexist peacefully, would be the weapon's first victim. The political ramifications would be... Vasquez started, then stopped. Admiral Voss would never authorize deployment if it meant killing you. The propaganda value alone would be worth more to the coalition than any military victory, Marcus agreed. Which brings us to the choice that ends wars. He gestured to the laboratory around them, to the weapons of genocide being refined in test tubes and computer models. You can complete your project and deploy it. Kill every Drachmarie in the galaxy, and probably destroy any hope of peaceful coexistence between species for the next 1,000 years. Or you can choose to believe that there's a better way, that the bond between my companions and me isn't a biological accident, but proof that we're all more alike than we are different. What followed was 6 hours of the most intense debate Marcus had ever witnessed. Scientists, military officers, and government officials argued through secure channels that spanned the galaxy. The moral implications of genocide warfare. The political consequences of targeting a human citizen with an alien-specific weapon. The long-term effects on galactic civilization if the war continued. Through it all, Marcus and his bondmates waited in the station's main conference room, feeling the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance. The Drachmarie fleet maintained its position at the edge of the system, ready to carry out their promised retaliation if negotiations failed. Coalition forces prepared for what could be either the war's end or its bloodiest escalation. The final decision came from an unexpected source. Admiral Voss herself, the architect of so much suffering, contacted the station directly. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, her voice carrying a weariness that spoke of too many battles and too many compromises. "Shut down Project Genesis. Destroy all research materials and genetic samples. Admiral, with respect, this weapon could end the war. This weapon could end our humanity," Voss interrupted. "I've spent the last 6 months watching footage of Marcus Chun and his bondmates. Surgical strikes that leave enemies alive. Rescue operations that save both human and alien civilians. Military precision that never loses sight of moral principles. If we deploy a genocide weapon against beings capable of that kind of restraint and honor, what does that make us?" Through the bond, Marcus felt his companion's surprise and hope mixing with his own emotions. They had been prepared for betrayal, for a last-minute reversal that would force them into the violent confrontation they'd all been trying to avoid. Instead, they were witnessing something even rarer than successful military tactics, a change of heart. The formal ceasefire was signed 3 days later aboard a neutral station in the Vega system. Representatives from the hegemony, the corporate alliance, the Stellar Republic, and the Drachmarie Imperium gathered in the same room for the first time in over a year. Marcus stood with his bondmates in the center of the circular chamber, feeling like the connecting link in a chain that had nearly broken. The negotiations would take months, possibly years. There would be reparations to negotiate, territorial boundaries to redraw, and 1,000 small details to work out. But the killing would stop. The genocide weapon had been destroyed, and for the first time since the war began, the galaxy had hoped that different species could share the same space without destroying each other. "The bond you share," Admiral Voss said to Marcus during a break in the formal proceedings, "is it something that could be replicated? Between other humans and Drachmarie?" Marcus looked at Storm, Echo, and Whisper feeling their amused affection through their connection. "I don't think it's something you can force," he said. "But I think it's something that happens naturally when people choose to trust each other completely. And if it doesn't work?" Marcus thought about the moment in the asteroid cave when he'd chosen to stand between three frightened hatchlings and armed soldiers, about the choice to rebuild rather than destroy at Fortress Meridian, about Dr. Vasquez's decision to abandon genocide in favor of hope. "Then you keep trying," he said, "because the alternative is unacceptable." 6 months later, Marcus Chun found himself exactly where he'd started, piloting a cargo hauler through the space lanes, carrying supplies to colonies that needed them. The only difference was that his cargo hold now contained medical supplies donated by the Drachmarie. His crew consisted of 3 fully grown dragons who had chosen to share his wandering lifestyle, and his passenger manifest regularly included diplomats, scientists, and refugees from a dozen different species. The Wandering Star had become something of a symbol in the post-war galaxy, a place where former enemies could work together, where different forms of life could find common ground, and where the future was being built one small choice at a time. Through the bond that had started with 3 frightened hatchlings in a dark cave, Marcus could feel his companions' contentment as they flew through the stars. They had found their purpose, not as warriors or weapons, but as bridges between worlds that had forgotten how to trust each other. The galaxy was healing, slowly, carefully, one relationship at a time, and in the cargo hold of a converted freighter, the future was taking shape through the simple act of choosing to believe that different didn't have to mean dangerous. Sometimes the greatest wars don't end with the surrender of armies or the signing of treaties. Sometimes they end with the quiet decision to see strangers as potential family, and to choose love over fear even when the cost seems too high to bear. Marcus Chun, dragon-bonded human, had learned that lesson the hard way. Now, as he flew through a galaxy, slowly learning to trust again, he carried that lesson with him to every world he visited. One cargo run at a time, one friendship at a time, one impossible choice at a time, he and his bondmates were helping to build something that had never existed before. A civilization where the strongest bonds weren't forged by conquest or domination, but by the simple willingness to protect each other's children. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. "I guess," he said, scratching Storm behind what might have been ears, "I fight for family."